Welcome. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome first and foremost to the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Leadership Summit. We are so glad that you could join us on this day of professional learning, meant to take family, school, community partnerships to the next level. My name is Marcy Cam, and I will be the session's moderator. This is session 1, Reflect, Connect, Collaborate, Lead, Core Competencies for Family and Community Engagement. If you do have any questions or concerns or technical issues, please privately message me in the chat and I'd be happy to help you out. To ensure that we're getting the most out of this day, we're asking that participants turn off the webcams and microphones. If you do have a question for the presenter, please use the chat feature and I'll pass that along at an appropriate time. You can also join our conversation on Twitter using the hashtag Breakthrough22 to share your thoughts. Today, we've kind of decided that we absolutely want you to get the most out of the session. You know, this is really designed for you in an interactive space. So we've decided to kind of keep it loose and really let you help drive the content. So just keep that in mind as we're going through. We're going to have some breakout rooms at the end, some polls, and lots of chances to be interactive. But at this point, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Margaret Kast, who joins us from the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement.
Thank you so much, Marcy, and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to this session. And as Marcy said, and Marcy, can we close this poll and come up with the other poll, if you don't mind, about who's in the room? But maybe we could launch it in 1 second. So Marcy and I, when we were planning for this session, we thought that we really wanted to make sure that it was interactive, it was dynamic, and we utilized all the features of Zoom that would allow us to have a conversation. So please bear with us as we try to make it as interactive as possible. So the title of this presentation is Reflect, Connect, Collaborate, and Lead. And I am Maggie Kast. I work for an organization called the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement, or NAFSCE, as you will hear us refer to ourselves. And if you go to the next slide, many of you are likely already members of NAFSCE, but if you haven't heard of us before, our mission is really to connect research, policy, and practice to promote innovative strategies in family and community engagement. And as a membership association, we do a variety of things, right? We promote dialogue through webinars and conferences for our members about family engagement topics. We also provide technical assistance to a number of states, including Ohio, and districts in their family and community engagement work. And finally, we really try to take on a number of projects that are of particular interest to our members and our field, and focusing on educator preparation, professional learning, and family and community engagement, and really building the capacity of family-facing professionals is one area that we've really tried to take the lead in. So let's go ahead. And Marcy, can I ask you now to bring up that poll, because now you know a little bit about me and Marcy, but we'd love to know who else is in the room with us today. So Marcy, if you pull up that poll, we are going to ask you, and Marcy, if you can't find it, that's fine too. We could chat it in the chat box. Just let us know, sort of the role that you have. Are you a family coordinator maybe? Are you a teacher? Are you, I don't know. So Marcy, do you want us to go ahead and do that? Do you want to, should we just chat it?
Yes, chatting would be wonderful.
Okay, so welcome Sabrina, who's an elementary school social worker. Susan, a state administrator. Amy is an FCP liaison. We have administrators, Department of Education staff, school community liaisons, more family liaisons, school counselors, educational consultant, parent education coordinator. That's great. A family, oh, Hadley. Hello, Hadley. Family engagement consultants. Okay, this is terrific. So it gives us a good sense of who's in the room with us today. And welcome and thank you. We're really excited that you are here. So in our next slide, why don't I go ahead and, just give us a little bit of a roadmap for where we are going to go together. I'm going to take a few minutes to share with you the family engagement core competencies, share a little bit of why we created them and data behind them. I'm going to present a little bit of research from a field survey that we did of over 500 family-facing professionals. And then finally, I thought it would be fun if we engaged in a little case study discussion. We'll see how that goes in a space like this with only an hour. So we appreciate your flexibility. But, I did want to begin by sharing the case study that I thought we could discuss today. This case study was written by Rabea Akhtar, who is a family-facing professional from the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And Rabea wrote this short case that you see on the screen as part of an effort that the city of Cambridge was involved in and that some of my colleagues and I helped to support. To help raise up and share the stories, the struggles, the strengths, whose families' voices, quite frankly, are often underrepresented in conversations that take place in the school and the community. So this effort was really one to raise up those voices and bring them to a variety of community players, including police and fire departments, early childhood providers, what have you. So, and the case reads like this. Nadia is a 30-year-old mother who came to the United States from Bangladesh 2 years ago with her twins, a 6-year-old boy and girl. She would like to participate and help her children in school, but hasn't attended any school events. I am a school family liaison, so I reached out to Nadia to invite her to our public schools back to school night. She told me that she planned to go and had gotten a flyer about it from the school 2 different times. The day before the event, though, I called to remind her, and she told me that her plans had changed. She would not go. So dilemmas like these are not uncommon for family liaisons, family coordinators, family-facing professionals. And I'd like you to keep this case in the back of your mind throughout this presentation. And my sincere hope is that we have time at the end of the presentation to really start to discuss and use some of the tools that we're going to talk about to help us really manage the dilemma and think about ways that we can really find different types of solutions. So I'm going to go to the next screen, though, and I'd like for us to just take a little bit of a step back. So the definition of family engagement that we at NAFSP and many others use is that family and community engagement is a shared responsibility among families, schools, and communities to support student learning. So in this way, family and community engagement is not a one-size-fits-all program or service, but it's really the ways that families guide, support, and advocate for a child's learning. And for schools and communities, it's about reaching out to families and creating the conditions for families to not be subordinate to the school, but really to be critical partners. And on the next slide, you're going to see that research points to a number of positive benefits of family and community engagement for everyone involved. For students, it leads to improved student outcomes across the developmental spectrum. For teachers, it leads to increased job satisfaction. For families, it leads to increased family well-being and leadership. And we also know that family engagement is a matter of equity. Research really shows that family engagement bears its greatest impact on those families who are most underserved. So family and community engagement is a big part of creating more equitable learning. But on the next slide, you're going to see a challenge, because despite all that we know about family and community engagement, it is often at the periphery of school reform efforts and practices. And there are a wide variety of reasons for why this might be, and I'm not going to get into all of them now due to time, but perhaps one of the biggest reasons is that family-facing professionals, and by that we mean school leaders, educators, family coordinators, after-school providers, really anyone who works with families, very rarely receive opportunities early on or throughout their careers to learn how to partner with families and communities. And data really point out again and again that family-facing professionals want to engage families meaningfully and equitably, but they just aren't often provided opportunities to learn and grow these skills. So for those of you who like concrete numbers, the next few slides are just some data that we've collected over the last few years, really substantiating these claims. In a recent national survey of educator preparation programs across the country we did in partnership with the NEA and others, we found that only 51% of educator preparation programs offered a standalone course in family and community engagement. And when we asked how family engagement was integrated into typical coursework, we found that it was mainly part of classes on teaching children with special needs, culturally sustaining pedagogy, and classroom management, which really leaves a variety of spaces it could be addressed. But it's not just educator preparation programs who are saying this. Educators themselves have these same reflections. In the summer of 2020, you all remember that time, lots of fun, NAFSC conducted a survey of family engagement during the pandemic. And we found that only 47% of educators felt that they were properly prepared to engage families. And on a slightly more positive number, 64% of educators felt that their school provides them with professional learning for family engagement, but a large gap still remains. And on the next slide, you'll hear more about the results of this survey in a little bit. But NAFSC's survey of family-facing professionals that many of you might have even responded to, that we conducted last year, we found that fewer than 40% of family-facing professionals believe that their pre-service or professional training fully covered core competencies needed to engage families. So really all of this is problematic because without opportunities to practice and learn about family engagement over the course of their careers, family-facing professionals are less likely to understand families and communities and less likely to really have the culturally sustaining stance and skills it takes to achieve family and community engagement in meaningful ways. So on the next slide, you're going to see how we responded to this gap. We really wanted to drill down at NAFSC as a membership association and provide for the field a roadmap and core competencies that family-facing professionals could develop and practice to partner with families and communities. And again, this is really important because as the family engagement field, we need a foundation for our roles and to help set the sequence and scope for building professional capacity. And the resulted report that you see on the screen, and I know Marcy is going to drop that link into the chat box at some point, but we're calling this the Family Engagement Core Competencies. And it was really created to document these knowledge, skills, and dispositions. And what sets this work apart is that while there are a number of standards documents out there that stress the importance of family-facing professionals having family engagement competencies, you might be thinking of the National PTA standards or the Head Start relationship-based competencies. All of these standards are typically aligned to roles within specific fields or placed at the organizational level, or really specific to particular points in children's learning. So the goal of this document is really to center the core competencies of family engagement for family-facing professionals, regardless of the role, regardless of the setting, regardless of the state. And to be clear, our intention is not to replace or supplant the existing work that's coming forward, but really to enhance, unify, and amplify it. And in the next slide, just a quick note on our methodology, just to give you a sense of how this document was created. We created this document through 6 phases. In phase 1, we convened a committee of family engagement experts like district and state leaders, faculty, teachers, parent leaders, family liaisons, researchers, and really this group has been with us every step of the way. And they really helped us derive and unpack what family-facing professionals know, do, and stand for. Hadley was there, Barbara Boone was there. In phase 2 and 3, we synthesized themes and ideas emerging from our conversations into 8 main competency areas, and really conducted a literature review to ground the emerging competencies in an evidence base. In phase 4, we conducted a comprehensive crosswalk of the emerging 8 competencies across the standards of other major national organizations. And to finish up our methodology in phase 5, we engaged over 60 partners in focus groups and Delphi surveys. And finally, in that last phase, as I mentioned, we conducted a national validation survey. So I'll share with you those data in a bit. So without further ado, on the next screen, you're going to see our organizing framework for our competencies, which is that family-facing professionals who are effective and equitable in their work really reflect, connect, collaborate, and lead. Reflect is about looking inward and examining biases and respect for families. Connect is about building trusting relationships with families and fostering social networks. Collaborate is about linking this work to student learning and social emotional growth. And lead is about standing alongside families for systems change to champion equity. And it's important to note really that we need to see these domains collectively. I'm going to present them in a moment separately, but they're really not modular or discrete. It's really the synergy among them that creates change. So in other words, advanced family-facing professionals are consistently and seamlessly integrating connection and collaboration and leadership all together throughout their practice. So here we are. And I know we don't have a lot of time to go into a lot of detail into all of them, but I really wanted to unpack what each of the competencies look like. So within Reflect, competency 1 shows how family-facing professionals respect, honor, and value families. They examine the cultural and linguistic diversity of families and communities, and they really explore, understand, and honor with families how children develop, grow, and change from birth through adulthood across settings, and how these changes really affect families. And competency 2 is really about family-facing professionals embracing equity throughout family engagement. They look inward to develop cultural humility and cognitive flexibility and perspective-taking skills. And they really also reflect on how history and social context influence family engagement practices. So let's take a minute. I'd love for you to, go to your chat box and, take a second to think about and chat out. What are some of the strategies that you use in your work to learn about families? What are some of the things that perhaps you're doing to really understand and take families' perspectives? What are some of those things that you're doing in your practice? Nicole has a great comment here, using the funds of knowledge. Lindsay's utilizing family stakeholder groups. So really trying to understand from participant perspectives ahead of time and really engaging during initial meetings. Hadley's writing about how we intentionally learn from families by asking families on their advisory council to give feedbacks. And Sabine is talking about home visits. Amazing. There's a lot of research to show that home visits are such an important way for family-facing professionals to learn about families, and at the same time for families to change their own understanding about family-facing professionals as well. Carissa's talking about two-way communication apps. And so these are having open table conversations. All of these are great. These strategies are really super, and are really good, good ideas for helping us to think about how to reflect and understand the families we work with. So I'm going to keep moving on to our second domain, which is really connect. So family-facing professionals, we know, are, and parent cafes, I'm seeing Rochelle pop up in my box, family-facing professionals who are effective connect. Competency 3 shows how they build trusting, reciprocal relationships with families by cultivating trust, communicating effectively, creating welcoming environments, and reaching out actively to families, really beyond the brick and mortar buildings, especially to those who might be most underserved. And we also know that family-facing professionals also foster community partnerships for learning and family well-being. They build these partnerships to support children and families and really start to establish systems to expand how families link to community resources. And they cultivate social support networks and connections among families too. Our next competency area is collaborate. And when we think about collaboration, we think about it almost as an extension of connection. So whereas connect is about building relationships and connecting with families, collaboration takes it a step further and really links family and community engagements to student learning and thinks about the role of co-construction in doing this. So I saw that term funds of knowledge pop up earlier. But what family-facing professionals do is they build upon family knowledge as resources for learning, just like with family ambassadors. And they join together with families for planning, implementing, and evaluating learning opportunities and services. So in other words, programs, services, and practices are not developed to and for families, but really developed with them. And Competency 6 also shows how family-facing professionals link family and community engagement to learning and development. And this can mean developing data systems that are accessible to each and every family, creating conversations around development and academic progress. And whether they're in school, early childhood, library, or after-school spaces, family-facing professionals are really expanding on family learning in the home, in the community. And our last domain is really about leadership. Competency 7 shows how family-facing professionals continuously take part in lifelong learning to identify and participate as a member of the family engagement profession, engage in professional learning, like events like today, to grow family engagement knowledge and skills, and really use data to assess, evaluate, and improve family and community engagement. And finally, that last competency is about family-facing professionals advocating for systems change, identifying and examining new and existing policies and practices, and really championing equity and standing with families for equitable systems and outcomes, and working to reframe the conversation around family and community engagement. So let's take a short break here. And Marcy, would you be able to go ahead and launch that poll? Because I think it would be neat to get a little bit of a pulse check. And the question I would like to ask is, which of the competency areas do you feel most comfortable with? So take a second to think about, which is this area that you feel most comfortable with, and perhaps you find yourself really spending a lot of your time in this area. Is it reflect, connect, collaborate, or lead? And Marcy, I'll let you, a little like popcorn, when you see the answers die down. I'll let you close the poll and let us know. Sometimes it's like a little bit of a horse race trying to see which one is emerging out. So Marcy, do you want to share and let us know?
Yes, it looks like connect is leading the charge with 50%, followed by collaborate at 32%, reflect at 27%, and lead with 10%.
Ah, that's great. So lead being the area of probably less comfort, and connection and collaboration being those areas that really feel like our powerhouse. And what I'm going to do before we move on to our case study is that data actually mirrors it's very aligned and very closely related to the data that we collected. If you go to the next slide, you'll remember that when I talked to you about the process for putting together our core competencies and emerging these 8 competencies, at the very end of the process, we did a validation study. And I just wanted to provide some of the data that we received on this, because what's interesting is they're very aligned with what the data we just found in our small sample. So the sample for this report actually came from family-facing professionals from a variety of roles. Interestingly, the most common roles were family liaison, the nonprofit agency staff, sort of like we have here today. Respondents came from various geographic regions. Elementary schools were the age group worked with most often, and most respondents to this survey were well experienced in family-facing roles. 59% worked in family-facing roles for more than a decade. And 83% of surveyed family-facing professionals held a bachelor's degree or higher qualification. So we asked the family-facing professionals in this survey 4 main questions. So the first question on the next slide we asked was whether those who were surveyed performed each of the competencies. And we found that yes, each of the evaluated competencies was performed by more than 90% of surveyed family-facing professionals, with most performed by more than 95%. So this is important because it suggests that our competencies are covering what family-facing professionals actually know and do. So the second question that we really wanted to know is how important the competencies were to each of our respondents. And very similar to our little pulse check here, we found that competency 3, building trusting relationships with families, and competency 1, respecting, honoring, and valuing families, were really rated 2 of the most critically important competencies for family-facing professionals to develop. And then we asked how well prepared for each of the competencies our respondents were. And here we found that respondents were most prepared in competency 3, to build trusting relationships, and competency 1, but least prepared in competency 8, to advocate for systems change, as well as competency 2, to champion equity throughout family engagement. So as I mentioned previously, when we look at the data overall, we're seeing that on average, many respondents feel underprepared for each competency. More than 60% of respondents indicated that the content was just not fully covered by their training. And on the last slide, we were interested in what family-facing professionals saw as their greatest training needs. And here, this is not going to really be a surprise to this group because I think it reflects some of our own thinking as well. We found that respondents viewed their greatest needs for training in Competency 8 to advocate for systems change, as well as Competency 2 and Competency 5. How to co-construct learning opportunities with families. So given all of that, I think maybe what might make sense here is to take a pause. And Marcy, you know, I haven't really been watching the chat box with very, very closely, but, you know, I'd love to pause here maybe before we move into our case study for any questions, you know, to put in this, to put in the chat box, or if any questions have come in so far. I think, you know, this might be a great place to pause, and even just, you know, have a few reflections in the chat, or if anybody even just wants to come off of mute and share any reflections, happy to have that too.
I will add, as folks are adding their questions and comments in the chat, that we've been given a beautiful gift of an additional 10 minutes to our session. So we can have kind of more time for Q&A and our breakout. So keep that in mind and don't be shy about putting your questions in.
That's great, Marcy. Thank you for that. So why don't we move ahead? We'll leave some other time, but I think the next question, and if you know, is how do we begin to develop and use the core competencies? And on the next slide, because this is, you know, a question that we've been asking ourselves and we've been asking many people in the field, which is once you've downloaded the core competencies and take a look at them, one of the questions that really starts to emerge is, well, how do we put them into use? And, you know, I know Hadley's on the line here and she's doing, she's using the core competencies as part of a structure to organize a self-efficacy tool that she's developing for her dissertation. So using some of those indicators to develop a tool, we're excited to be working with Ohio to develop a rubric to help with some self-reflection around family and community engagement. And Hadley writes that she's looking to sharing it soon. And, you know, we're excited to be working with Maryland to run some professional learning communities around these competencies as well. But one interesting way that we've started to see the competencies being used is in professional learning settings coupled with cases. The case study technique is a long used technique of using stories about real life dilemmas to help professionals, whether they're in the medical field, healthcare, law, business, education, to really lay out real life dilemmas and to think about and understand how to use them. And the core competencies have begun in one way to help shape some professional learning as a guiding habit of mind to think about how to start to solve some of these dilemmas. So if you go to the next screen, I'm going to have us go back to the case that I introduced at the very beginning of this session, the case of Nadia that Rabea shares, which really boils down to Nadia saying that she's going to be coming to back to school night and then at the last minute not coming. So Marcy and I thought it would be fun to give it a try in the spirit of giving everyone a little bit of time to connect with others throughout the state. We are going to break you out into breakout sessions, breakout rooms of about 5 or 6 people. And Marcy, on the next screen, maybe you could show what we would like everybody to do. So we would like you to pick one of the competency areas. Reflect, connect, collaborate, lead. You might pick all of them. You could pick one or two. But thinking about the case that we've presented, reflect. How does reflection help you check in internally? How does this situation make you feel? How are you going to stay centered? How do you think Nadia is feeling? How is Rabea feeling? For connect, what might Rabea do to connect with Nadia? What might you do in a situation like this? Have you experienced a situation like this? What have you done? For collaborate, how might collaboration help this situation? Are there particular ways that maybe co-construction, we don't know a lot, but could co-constructing back to school night perhaps have helped a little? Do you have experience like this? And for lead, are there ways Rabea and Nadia might lead alongside each other? So when you go into your breakout sessions, you have a few minutes, take a few minutes to connect with your colleagues, introduce yourselves very quickly, and then take a few minutes to really think about how reflect, connect, collaborate, and lead can really help you with this case. And I'm going to just read it one more time as you go into your breakout sessions, because I know that some of you got here a little bit maybe after I shared it. But the case is that Nadia is a 30-year-old mother who came to the U.S. from Bangladesh 2 years ago with her twins. She would like to participate and help her children in school, but hasn't attended any school events. I'm a family school liaison, so I reached out to Nadia to invite her to our public schools back to school night. She told me that she planned to go and had gotten a flyer about it from the school 2 different times. The day before the event, though, I called to remind her, and she told me that her plans had changed. She would not go. So Marcy, without further ado, why don't you send us into our breakout rooms? And I'm going to ask you to think about how reflect, connect, collaborate, and lead can help you manage this dilemma.
Okay, you'll be entering your breakout rooms and you'll have about 8 minutes to discuss among your colleagues.
Welcome back, everyone. We're going to take a few minutes and let everybody trickle back in. I hope that your time in your breakout rooms was productive. You got to meet some new folks from across your state and hopefully got to hear some interesting conversation around reflect, connect, collaborate, and lead. I had the great pleasure to be in group 7, I think we were, or 6, with some great colleagues. So I'm going to actually pass it over to them, who have humbly and graciously agreed to share. Melissa, Sarah, Megan, I see you there as well. Maybe share just, for a minute or two, what we discussed as we got through reflect, connect, collaborate, and lead.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Melissa Ladowitz. One of the things that we talked about in the reflection section in our group was we imagined that Nadia was probably feeling pretty disappointed. This was an event that she was excited about, and she was probably feeling let down and disappointed, maybe frustrated and disempowered because something came up and she wasn't able to attend. And then from Rabea's standpoint, as the family liaison, she was probably feeling, of a lot of excitement building up to the event, and then again, sort of let down and disappointed to learn that Nadia was not going to be able to attend.
Also on that, we discussed a little bit about connecting, providing access if there was an alternate way that Nadia could have joined. I don't know, providing an online access of sorts. And just reaching out, I think too, I don't know if we mentioned this in our group, but just figuring out, oh, what, did something come up? Is there something else that I can, offer for you to access? So reaching out now that the plan had changed where Nadia couldn't come, I think is also part of that connect. As far as the collaboration piece, we mentioned how can we ahead of time maybe involve Nadia in the planning of the evening so that maybe she was a big part of the evening that it was a back to school night, right? I think, okay. And maybe she could have been,
It was.
okay. And a highlight of the evening so that it would have, cleared all the other to-dos and all the other things that may have possibly came up, that she could have been there more. Anyway, but I think that covers if anybody else from our group wanted to share, but that was much of what we discussed.
Yeah, I think that covered it.
And thank you to Sarah, Melissa, and Megan for being so gracious to jump into the conversation. I know that we are almost out of time, and I don't want to leave everybody hanging on a cliffhanger. So before we open it up to more general and broad questions and answers, Marcy, can you go to the next slide? I'd love to show you the epilogue. So this is again a case. It's a true story and a true experience. So that this is how things did end up. Nadia could not drive, and her husband didn't have time that day to take her. So it was not possible for her to take public transportation because she was afraid she wouldn't find the address and was also afraid to walk to the school with her twins in the dark. So she also thought, and I think this is important, that back to school night was a dinner party or a potluck to meet with other parents and teachers. So she didn't think the event was very important, even though she had received the event flyer from the school. So I explained to her that it was not a dinner party or a potluck. It was very important for her and her children. She would meet her children's teacher to learn about the syllabus and subjects her children would study. I explained that the back to school night event was an opportunity to ask questions about her children's education and see her children's classroom. And after I explained why she should attend it, she was very thankful because she didn't understand the importance of the back to school night when she had seen the flyers. So she convinced her husband to drive her before he went to school, and she attended the back to school night. Nadia now goes to most school events throughout the school year. Not only does she attend, she calls other parents to make sure they attend as well. So, I think in this short hour together, what, I was hoping was to not only share the family engagement core competencies that we hope as you go back to your everyday work tomorrow, or even as you're doing it now, reflect, connect, collaborate, and lead can be some touch points for you, not only maybe in designing professional learning experiences, but also, in your own reflection of always thinking through different situations or dilemmas that are coming up after you reflected, thinking about how you can connect, collaborate, and lead with families. So with that, if we go, Marcy, to the next screen, what I wanted to do was I just wanted to share one more time our email address, as well as NAPSC's information for you to all have. I am always available by email if more questions come up. But Marcy, why don't we go ahead and I haven't looked at the chat box in a while, or if anybody has some new questions coming in. But I would love to, I think on our last few minutes together, take any questions or reflections from the group.
We did have a question come in early on from Tom Hess. He said he would love to hear more about the correct connections and inclusions of community partners in your engagement efforts, and how this might be particularly important with families of people with sons or daughters with a disability.
Thank you very much for that question. So when NAPSC nearly 3 years ago, was, thinking about and was really charged with the field with developing this document. The first thing that NAPSG really said to itself was, we are a membership organization and we represent the field. And this document cannot be one that, a set of academics or a set of researchers set to develop alone in isolation. It needs to be a process that is really grounded in family and community expertise. So that first step was really creating the credentialing committee that I told you about, which was this, real advisory board of diverse stakeholders and partners who joined us over 3 years in this development. But in the survey portion later on, so around phase 4, phase 5, when we had finally whittled down a lot of the themes that had emerged, we felt it was really important to sit down and have focus groups and interviews with different key stakeholders. So we ran 5 or 6 different sessions where grouped by like categories. So we had a group of parent leaders, many of whom are part of NAPSG's Parent Family Leadership Council and sit on different state and district local education boards, and parent leaders who said, who really pushed us, and a lot of changes were made and a lot of the terminology that we used. We had another group of community partners who were after school providers, librarians, who really pushed us to say, we can't think only about, in school as family facing professionals, because a lot of family and community engagement takes anywhere, anytime outside in the community. We had administrator groups give us feedback. And in all of these groups, all to say, children of parents of children with disabilities, and specific groups of exceptional children were included throughout all of these. So many parent leaders had children with IEPs who spoke very passionately about how this work is even more important for them. Many educators who work in that space as well. So I think, and really pushing us to make sure that the language, especially if you download the document, you're going to see a lot of language specifically around in LEAD, around advocating for families to know the rights of children. So thank you. Thank you for that question. I think that's a really important one. Appreciate it.
We also had a question from Sarah on some concrete ideas of how we can expand family learning in the home, especially in a way that honors the language and cultures of families.
Yeah. And that's definitely in that collaboration space, right? So that 6th competency is really where we're thinking about, really squarely thinking about some of those connections to learning in the home and learning in the community. And, one of the spaces, the examples that I'll just provide, is actually NAPSG leads the National Center for Family Math. And in this, part of what we've been thinking about is how do we create more robust opportunities for mathematics, not just to happen in schools and classrooms, because we know that the learning and thinking about math starts from birth and happens again everywhere all the time around us. And how do we create more opportunities for family math? And not only in the home, but in libraries and after school programs and parks, what can we do to mathematize the world? And one of the strategies, and somebody brought this up very early on in the chat, was really around thinking about funds of knowledge. So really, when we think about learning in the home, learning in the community, it's really taking what it is that families and communities do in their everyday lives and connecting it in meaningful and robust ways to other ways that we see it happening in the community. And Marta Seville is a professor at the University of Arizona. Many of you might already know of some of her work, but she runs, I'm using this as just an example, she runs family math workshops. And, you know, she finds ways that families play games together, like Loteria, or Papel Picado, and she plays games that intentionally happen every day in the home, in the community. And she works with families, for them to teach her the games that are played within the community, but then to also show, perhaps when you're folding your paper in this way, or you're playing this game, this is the math skill that's emerging. This is symmetry. This is perimeter. This is area. So lots of, so that's one example. I'm sure all of you on the line here have wonderful examples of this as well. But I think it's an important one that we're not, in a unidirectional way saying this is what you must do, but it's saying what is already happening and how can we find ways to co-create and connect and build together.
Thank you so much. And we do have one final question about engaging schools in the rural communities.
So, and the question being how might we engage?
Yes.
Okay. So, and I think this is a great question. And I think I'm going to actually answer this. There are a lot of networks that are emerging out there around families, schools, and rural communities. And, this question of access, this question of distance, this question of transportation, often being some of the biggest, barriers perhaps to face-to-face meetings. So what we're seeing is increased opportunities to extend family engagement opportunities outside of just one location in the school, but finding opportunities for projects to occur across an entire community. I'm thinking of one community where basically the engagement took place through the leadership of the library that was looking to create a community-wide book reading event, actually around the book Refugee. And what was beautiful about this rural community that really set out to do this work is they wanted to infuse this project into all of the different spaces where community members were, because they knew that distance was sometimes a barrier. So schools took on the project, libraries took on the project, after school programs, as well as, just locate, fire departments that were nearby. But, I think one way to think about that question is to think about, how are we, moving family and community engagement, not just in one brick and mortar school, but really infusing it throughout the community where families are, to reduce some of those barriers to location and geography.
Thank you so much. I think we are at time. So please, everyone, join me in thanking our presenter for her time today and knowledge in the chat. Before we take our brief break for lunch, I have a couple of reminders. At 12 o'clock, Dr. Barbara Boone will be leading a 30-minute candid conversation on leadership. All are welcome to attend. If you would like to access this session, you'll go to the Summit homepage and scroll to the 12 o'clock lunchtime session. You don't need to register. All other sessions will begin at 12:45. And if this is your final session for the day, please take a few moments to complete our survey that I'll throw in the chat. We do ask that you only fill it out once, and surveys will be used to administer contact hours. So please complete the survey if you're seeking credit after the session. So again, thank you all for attending. This has been such an enlightening and informative session. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you all.